The brother betrayal. In December 211 CE, Rome was ruled by two emperors. Geta, the younger son of Emperor Septimius Severus, shared power with his older brother Caracalla. The brothers divided the imperial palace with separate guards, refused to eat together, and suspected constant assassination plots. Their mother, Julia Domna, desperately tried to maintain peace between her sons. On a winter evening, Geta received an urgent summons. His mother requested his presence in her private apartments for a reconciliation meeting with Caracalla. Trusting his mother's protection, Geta arrived unarmed. What he didn't know was that centurions loyal to Caracalla were already positioned inside. As Geta entered the room, the doors locked behind him. His brother greeted him with a cold stare. The meeting was a trap. On Caracalla's signal, centurions burst from hiding places and drew their swords. Geta ran to his mother, throwing himself into her arms. Julia screamed and tried to shield him with her own body. Blood splattered across her dress as the centurion stabbed Geta repeatedly. He died in his mother's embrace, his blood soaking her clothes as she wailed in horror. Caracalla wasn't satisfied with merely killing his brother. He launched a ruthless campaign to erase Geta from history. Anyone connected to Geta, friends, servants, supporters, was executed without trial. Historical records indicate over 20,000 people were killed in the purge. Geta's face was chiseled off statues, his name erased from inscriptions, and possessing his image became treason punishable by death. The ultimate cruelty came when Caracalla forbade his mother from mourning publicly. Julia was forced to smile and celebrate while her son's memory was systematically destroyed. The assassination in a mother's chambers, meant to be a sanctuary, made Geta's death not just violent, but a profound betrayal of family trust. The disease of rot. In the early months of 311 CE, the Roman Emperor Galerius was at the height of his power, a military commander who had risen through the ranks. He had ruled the eastern provinces with an iron fist for nearly 2 decades. Known for his brutal persecution of Christians, Galerius was feared rather than loved. His muscular frame and battle-hardened demeanor intimidated those around him. But even the most powerful men cannot escape the ravages of disease. What began as a small abscess in his genital region quickly developed into something far more sinister. Court physicians applied standard treatments, poultices, herbal remedies, and primitive surgical drainage, but nothing helped. The abscess grew larger, spreading across his groin. Within weeks, it had ulcerated, creating an open wound that refused to heal. The deterioration was relentless. The ulceration penetrated deeper into his body, eventually creating a pathway directly into his intestines. Contemporary accounts describe worms breeding in his putrefying flesh. As the infection spread, the stench became unbearable. Courtiers gagged when entering his chambers. Perfumes and incense burned constantly, but could not mask the smell of rotting flesh. Galerius was fully conscious through this process, experiencing excruciating pain that no opium or wine could fully dull. As his condition worsened, Galerius grew desperate. Physicians who failed to cure him were executed. Some accounts suggest several doctors were beheaded for their inability to stop the progression of the disease. Those spared execution worked frantically, trying increasingly dangerous treatments. One chronicler noted the emperor's screams could be heard throughout the palace complex. In his final days, Galerius, perhaps seeing divine punishment for his persecution, issued an edict of toleration for Christians. His body, now largely consumed by gangrene, finally surrendered. Attendants reported that in his final moments, the emperor who had ordered countless executions begged for a mercy killing that never came. The throat cut in the deadly harem coup. In 1155 BC, Egypt was ruled by Ramesses III, a powerful pharaoh who had successfully defended his kingdom against foreign invaders and maintained order throughout the land. He was the second king of Egypt's 20th dynasty and had reigned for over 30 years. But inside the walls of his own palace, a deadly conspiracy was forming. His secondary wife, Taa, became determined to place her son, Pentawere, on the throne instead of the designated heir. The plot involved multiple conspirators from the royal harem and even included high-ranking officials and military men. Their plan was not merely to remove the pharaoh from power, but to eliminate him entirely. On a night in 1155 BC, the conspirators made their move. Ramesses was attacked suddenly and violently within his own palace. For centuries, the exact manner of his death remained unknown. Modern technology finally revealed the horrifying truth. CT scans of his mummified body, performed in 2012, showed evidence of a brutal assassination. The pharaoh's throat had been sliced open with such ferocity that both his trachea and esophagus were completely severed. The cut was deep and precise, made with a sharp blade, likely a dagger or knife. The wound would have caused near instantaneous death. Blood would have filled his airway, making it impossible to breathe. He would have been unable to call for help. Within seconds, the mighty pharaoh would have collapsed, bleeding profusely from the gaping wound in his neck. But the attack didn't end there. The scans also revealed that his big toe had been hacked off, apparently with a different weapon, suggesting multiple attackers or a frenzied assault. His body bore silent witness to a coordinated and ruthless coup that ended one of Egypt's most successful reigns in sudden violence. The conspirators' plot ultimately failed. Court records showed that those involved were caught and subjected to harsh punishment. Pentawere never claimed the throne he and his mother had killed for. Hacked in battle. King Senebkay's violent end. Around 1650 BC, during Egypt's turbulent Second Intermediate Period, a previously unknown pharaoh met a horrifically violent end on the battlefield. His name was Senebkay, ruler of a short-lived dynasty based in Abydos, sandwiched between more powerful kingdoms to the north and south. His existence was only discovered in 2014 when archaeologists uncovered his tomb and skeletal remains. What they found told the story of one of the most brutal royal deaths in ancient Egyptian history. Senebkay's bones revealed he had suffered at least 18 distinct wounds during his final battle. The attack was systematic and savage. The pattern of injuries showed that the king was likely mounted on horseback when the assault began. His attackers first targeted his lower body, striking at his exposed ankles and feet with sharp weapons. Multiple deep cuts penetrated the bones of both feet. Slash marks on his ankles showed his attackers were trying to bring him down from his elevated position. As Senebkay fell, the assault intensified. His knees were hacked at, with one blow nearly severing his left kneecap. His hands showed defensive wounds, deep gashes where he had tried to shield himself from the onslaught. The killing blows came when he was already on the ground. At least 3 massive strikes to his skull from distinctive duckbill-shaped battle axes crushed through bone. One blow torn to the base of his skull, while another shattered his forehead. A third strike landed above his right ear with such force that it penetrated deep into his brain. Forensic analysis suggests Senebkay remained conscious through much of the attack, aware of each painful blow as his body was systematically destroyed. The pattern of wounds indicates he was surrounded, with attackers striking from multiple angles, giving him no chance to escape. The once forgotten pharaoh had died fighting, his royal status offering no protection against the brutality of ancient warfare. The split skull of Senebkay, Taa II. During the 17th dynasty, around 1560 BC, Egypt was partially occupied by the Hyksos, foreign rulers who controlled the northern territories from their capital at Avaris. In the southern city of Thebes, Pharaoh Senebkay Taa II led a resistance against these invaders. His mummy, discovered in the 19th century, tells the gruesome story of his final moments, a death so violent it shocked even experienced archaeologists. Modern CT scans and X-ray analyses have revealed the full horror of how this pharaoh died. His skull bears the marks of at least 5 separate, devastating wounds. The first blow struck his forehead, a massive impact that fractured his frontal bone and would have instantly incapacitated him. A second crushing strike landed above his right eye, shattering the orbital cavity. Another blow smashed into his nose with such force that it broke through to the base of his skull. The pattern of injuries suggests Senebkay was not simply killed, but systematically executed. A deep stab wound at the base of his skull shows where a dagger or spear was driven upward into his brain. The placement indicates his attackers knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. The final blow was a savage cut that tore through his left cheek and broke his jawbone. The forensic evidence indicates Senebkay was likely kneeling or lying down when most of these wounds were inflicted. He was not killed in the chaos of battle, but methodically dispatched by attackers who took their time. The wounds match Hyksos weapons, particularly the distinctive axe heads found in archaeological sites from the period. Most disturbing of all, the condition of his mummy shows his body was left unattended for hours after death. His facial muscles show signs of decay that occurred before embalmers could begin their work. This suggests he died far from his palace, perhaps as a prisoner in enemy territory. The proud pharaoh who had defied foreign occupation spent his final moments not in battle, but in helpless agony, as his captors systematically destroyed his body, and with it, his royal dignity. Defeated Emperor Drag. On December 20th, 69 CE, the streets of Rome became the stage for one of the most humiliating imperial deaths in history. Vitellius had been emperor for only 8 months during the chaotic year of the 4 emperors. A man known more for his gluttony than leadership, he had risen to power through military support rather than merit. As the forces of his rival Vespasian entered Rome, Vitellius knew his reign was ending. The fighting in the city was fierce. Vitellius, desperate to escape, disguised himself in dirty clothes and hid in the janitor's quarters of his palace. He barricaded the door with a mattress and kept a dog for protection. This final hiding place was a pathetic contrast to the imperial quarters he had recently occupied. When Vespasian's soldiers discovered him, Vitellius begged for his life, claiming he possessed vital state secrets. His pleas were ignored. The soldiers bound his hands behind his back and threw a noose around his neck. They placed a sword point under his chin, forcing him to keep his head up so everyone could see his face. Then they dragged him from the palace. The man who had ruled the known world was paraded half naked through the forum like a common criminal. The citizens of Rome, who had suffered through civil war and food shortages, showed no mercy. They pelted him with rotten food and human excrement. Some spat in his face while others shouted obscenities. Every few steps, someone would pull his hair or prick him with a blade. This was not a quick execution, but a slow, deliberate humiliation. At the Gemonian Stairs, traditional site of punishment, Vitellius was subjected to a long series of small cuts before being finished off. His body was then mutilated, hooked onto a pole, and dragged to the Tiber River, where it was unceremoniously thrown in, denying him proper burial and, by Roman belief, any peace in the afterlife. The Poisoned Feast. On October 13th, 54 CE, the imperial palace in Rome became the scene of a calculated murder that would change the course of history. Emperor Tiberius Claudius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, a 63-year-old ruler with a reputation for physical infirmity but sharp intellect, sat down to a lavish dinner. His wife Agrippina the Younger had been planning this meal with particular care. The aging emperor had recently hinted at changing his succession plans to favor his biological son Britannicus over Agrippina's son Nero. The dinner featured one of Claudius's favorite delicacies, mushrooms. Unknown to the emperor, Agrippina had enlisted the help of a woman named Locusta, Rome's most notorious poisoner. The mushrooms served to Claudius had been carefully laced with a toxic substance. He consumed them eagerly, unaware of the betrayal by his own wife. Within hours, the first symptoms appeared. According to the historian Tacitus, Claudius experienced severe stomach pains and vomiting. The initial poisoning, however, wasn't entirely successful. Claudius's body began expelling the toxin naturally. He appeared to be recovering by the next morning, much to Agrippina's alarm. She couldn't allow him to survive and expose her plot. Acting quickly, she summoned the emperor's personal physician Xenophon, who was secretly loyal to her cause. What happened next has been debated by historians for centuries. The most accepted account claims Xenophon inserted a poisoned feather into the emperor's throat, ostensibly to help induce vomiting and relieve his symptoms. Some sources suggest he might have used a poisoned enema instead. Either way, the result was the same. The second dose of poison was delivered directly into Claudius's system, bypassing his body's natural defenses. The emperor began convulsing. His breathing became labored, and he could no longer speak. As imperial attendants watched helplessly, Claudius's extremities grew cold. His eyes bulged as the poison attacked his nervous system. He died slowly, his body paralyzed but his mind likely aware until the final moment. Agrippina delayed announcing his death until preparations for Nero's succession were complete. The mob's last king led away in chains. In 525 BC, Egypt faced an existential threat. Persian forces led by King Cambyses II invaded the ancient kingdom, determined to add it to their expanding empire. Standing against them was Pharaoh Senebkay III, who had ruled for barely 6 months when the Persian army appeared at Egypt's borders. Unlike previous invasions in Egypt's 3,000-year history, this one would not be repelled. And for Senebkay himself, it would lead to one of the most humiliating ends any pharaoh had ever suffered. The decisive battle took place at Pelusium in the Nile Delta. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the Egyptians were outmatched and outmaneuvered. Their army collapsed, and Senebkay fled to Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital. The Persians pursued, laying siege to the city. Within days, Memphis fell. Senebkay was captured alive, the beginning of a slow, psychological death that would strip away everything that made him divine in Egyptian eyes. Cambyses ordered his royal prisoner brought before him in chains. The once mighty pharaoh, God incarnate to his people, was now forced to kneel before a foreign king. But Cambyses wasn't satisfied with mere capture. He orchestrated a spectacle designed to break Senebkay's spirit completely. The pharaoh was forced to watch as his son and 2,000 young Egyptian nobles were paraded past him, bits in their mouths like horses, on their way to execution. Senebkay maintained his composure until he saw an elderly friend reduced to begging in the streets. Only then did he weep openly, his spirit finally broken. Initially spared execution, Senebkay was kept alive as a trophy, a living symbol of Persian dominance. But according to Herodotus, he couldn't endure this existence for long. He began plotting against his captors, a final desperate attempt to reclaim his honor. When Cambyses discovered these plans, he ordered Senebkay to drink bull's blood, a method of execution that causes agonizing death as the blood coagulates in the stomach and digestive tract. The last native pharaoh of Egypt died in excruciating pain, far from home. His body never returned to the sacred soil he once ruled. The Berenice slaying. In 80 BC, Egypt was ruled by a queen who commanded the respect of her people. Berenice III was the daughter of Ptolemy IX and had become the sole ruler of Egypt following her father's death. She was popular among Alexandrians, who saw in her a capable leader during turbulent times. But the powerful Roman Republic had other plans for Egypt's throne. Under pressure from Rome, Berenice was forced to accept a co-ruler, her young stepson Ptolemy XI. The arrangement was sealed with marriage, a common practice among the Ptolemaic dynasty to legitimize rule. The wedding took place in Alexandria with all the expected ceremony, but behind the celebrations lay a calculating plot. Ptolemy XI had been raised in Rome under the influence of the Roman dictator Sulla, who had his own designs for Egypt's wealth. Just 19 days after the wedding, Ptolemy made his move. While Berenice slept in her royal chambers, assassins entered silently. They had been carefully selected and well paid for the task ahead. The queen awoke to find armed men surrounding her bed. Her calls for guards went unanswered. They had either been bribed or killed. What followed was a brutal struggle. Despite being outnumbered, historical accounts suggest Berenice fought desperately for her life. The assassins overpowered her, pinning her to the bed. One of them drew a blade across her throat, slicing through flesh and severing her jugular vein. Blood soaked the royal bedding as Berenice gasped for air, drowning in her own fluids. The murder was meant to secure Ptolemy's sole rule, but it backfired catastrophically. News of the beloved queen's death spread through Alexandria like wildfire. By morning, enraged citizens filled the streets. They stormed the palace, seized the young king, and dragged him to the Gymnasium, a public gathering place. There, surrounded by thousands of his subjects, Ptolemy XI was torn apart by the mob. His limbs were ripped from his body while he was still alive. His screams eventually silenced as the crowd dismembered him completely. He had ruled for less than 3 weeks. Overthrown, humiliated, and killed. Around 590 BC, Egypt was torn apart by civil conflict. On one side stood Pharaoh Apries, who had ruled for nearly 2 decades. On the other was Amasis, a general Apries had sent to quell a military rebellion, but who instead joined the rebels and declared himself king. The stage was set for one of Egypt's most brutal power struggles, and for us a death that would strip away all royal dignity. When Apries learned of Amasis' betrayal, he gathered mercenary soldiers from Korea and Greece to fight for him. The two armies met near the city of Memphis. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the battle was fierce but decisive. Apries' foreign troops were skilled but outnumbered by the Egyptian forces loyal to Amasis. As the day wore on, the battlefield became a slaughterhouse. Accounts differ on what happened next. In one version, Apries was captured on the battlefield. His royal guards cut down around him as he fought to escape. In another, he fled the battle only to be hunted down later. What is certain is that he fell into the hands of Amasis alive. The deposed pharaoh was not executed immediately. Instead, he was taken to his former palace in Sais, now occupied by his rival. There, he was held prisoner in what had once been his own royal chambers. Amasis, perhaps uncertain about killing a man still considered divine by many, initially spared him. This mercy didn't last. According to Herodotus, after repeated plots by Apries to regain power, Amasis handed him over to the Egyptian people, specifically to those who had grievances against the former king. They took Apries from his confinement and strangled him with a cord, a method that would prevent blood from being spilled. Other accounts suggest a more violent end. The Babylonian Chronicle records that Apries died in battle, perhaps in a later attempt to reclaim his throne. Archaeological evidence is inconclusive, but suggests his body was treated with some traditional royal burial rites, a final dignity after a humiliating end. The pharaoh who once styled himself as the one who cannot be overcome had been definitively defeated. Assassinated in his sleep. In 1962 BC, Egypt's powerful 12th dynasty had been founded through conquest and careful political maneuvering by Pharaoh Amenemhat I. He had risen from the position of vizier to seize the throne, establishing a new royal line that would dominate Egypt for nearly 2 centuries. He ruled for 30 years, crushing rebellions and securing Egypt's borders. But even the mightiest ruler remains vulnerable while he sleeps. According to the story of Senebkay, one of ancient Egypt's most famous literary works, the assassination took place in the dead of night. The palace in the capital city of Ichitawi was quiet, with only the night guards making their rounds through the darkened corridors. Amenemhat had retired to his private chambers, surrounded by luxury but with fatally few protectors. The conspirators were members of his own royal guard, men specifically chosen to protect him. Historical texts suggest they may have been acting on behalf of rival court factions, possibly even including members of the king's own family. They had carefully planned the attack, selecting a moment when the pharaoh would be most vulnerable. The guards entered his chamber silently. Amenemhat was asleep, unaware of the betrayal unfolding around him. The first blow likely woke him, a sudden sharp pain as a dagger plunged into his side. According to the ancient text, he fought back fiercely despite the surprise. It was after supper, when night had fallen and I had taken an hour of rest. I was asleep, but my heart was awake, the text recounts in the king's voice. The struggle was brief but violent. Multiple attackers surrounded the bed, stabbing repeatedly with bronze daggers. The aging king, despite his military experience, had no chance against so many armed men in such close quarters. He suffered numerous wounds to his torso and neck, each one drawing more of his royal blood. The final blow came as a thrust to his heart, ending the life of Egypt's great unifier. In his instructions, supposedly written for his son Senusret I, the dying king's final lesson was clear: trust no brother, know no friend. Senusret, who was away leading a military campaign when his father was killed, returned quickly to secure his succession and hunt down the assassins. slow dismemberment. On September 12, 1185, the streets of Constantinople witnessed a death so brutal that it shocked even the most hardened citizens of the Byzantine Empire. Andronicus I of Komnenos, a 65-year-old emperor known for his exceptional cruelty, had finally pushed his subjects too far. His reign of terror included mass executions, torture of opponents, and forcing relatives of his victims to dine amid the severed heads of their loved ones. When the city revolted, Andronicus attempted to flee by sea with his teenage wife. They were captured at the harbor. The fallen emperor was bound in heavy chains and presented to his successor, Isaac Angelus. But the new emperor didn't order a quick execution. Instead, he handed Andronicus over to the mob, the families of his many victims who had waited for this moment. What followed was not justice, but vengeance in its rawest form. The crowd stripped Andronicus naked and tied him to a post in the marketplace. For 3 days, the torture continued without pause. Citizens took turns inflicting whatever suffering they could imagine. First, they beat him with clubs until his skin turned purple and swelled. Then they began systematic mutilation. Someone cut off his right hand with a rusty blade. Others pulled out his teeth and hair, one by one, slowly and deliberately. An eyewitness recorded that the crowd gouged out his left eye and poured boiling water over his face, melting the skin away from the bone. Throughout this ordeal, Andronicus remained conscious. He reportedly repeated only, "Lord have mercy," as each new torture began. His body, once regal, became unrecognizable. On the third day, what remained of the emperor was dragged to the Hippodrome, the city's massive arena. There, he was hung upside down between two pillars, still breathing, still aware. Soldiers from the city garrison then took turns stabbing spears into his body, carefully avoiding vital organs to prolong his suffering. Death finally came when 2 Latin soldiers drove swords simultaneously into his torso from opposite sides. His body was left hanging for days afterward as a warning to future tyrants. The bathhouse betrayal. On December 31st, 192 CE, the final day of the Roman year became the final day of an emperor's life. Commodus, the 31-year-old ruler who styled himself as the reincarnation of Hercules, had spent years alienating Rome's political elite. Son of the respected emperor Marcus Aurelius, Commodus had squandered his inheritance through increasingly erratic behavior, fighting as a gladiator in the arena and demanding worship as a living god. Behind the scenes, a conspiracy was forming among those closest to him. That evening, Commodus prepared for his usual ritual bath before a planned appearance at the gladiatorial game. His mistress Marcia had already made the first attempt on his life earlier that day. She had poisoned his wine, but Commodus vomited it up after feeling the effects beginning. Suspicious but not yet certain of betrayal, he retired to his bath, still weakened from the poison. The conspirators, Marcia, his chamberlain Eclectus, and the praetorian prefect Latus, knew they had to act quickly. They sent for Narcissus, the emperor's wrestling partner, a muscular athlete who had earned Commodus's trust through countless training sessions. The emperor was alone in the bathhouse, steam rising from the heated water when Narcissus entered. Perhaps Commodus thought his training partner had come to help him recover from the earlier illness. Instead, Narcissus approached from behind while the emperor was vulnerable in the water. With powerful hands that had won countless wrestling matches, Narcissus grasped Commodus around the throat. The emperor struggled, but the poison had weakened him, and the slippery marble of the bath gave him no leverage. Water splashed violently as Commodus fought for his life. His lungs burned for air as Narcissus maintained his grip, squeezing tighter. The struggle lasted several minutes. Commodus clawed at his attacker's arms, his face turning purple, veins bulging at his temple. Eventually, his movements grew weaker. His eyes, once fierce with the delusion of godhood, bulged in terror. His body went limp in the bath, the water now still around his lifeless form. The assassination triggered a political crisis known as the Year of the Five Emperors. The consumed limbs. In April 491 CE, the Byzantine Emperor Zeno fell suddenly ill with severe dysentery. The 66-year-old ruler had made powerful enemies during his reign, particularly his wife Ariadne and the imperial chamberlain Urbicius. Originally from Isauria, a rugged region in modern-day Turkey, Zeno was considered a barbarian by Constantinople's elite. They had tolerated him, but never truly accepted him as their emperor. His illness presented an opportunity they had been waiting for. As Zeno's condition worsened, he fell into unconsciousness. The imperial physicians declared him dead. A funeral was hastily arranged, but what happened next was no proper burial. According to multiple Byzantine chroniclers, Zeno was still breathing when he was placed inside his sarcophagus in the imperial mausoleum. The heavy stone lid was sealed above him. No embalming was performed. No funeral rites were completed. The unconscious emperor was simply locked away in darkness. Hours later, Zeno awoke inside his own tomb. The pitch darkness was absolute. The air was already growing stale. At first, he might have thought he was experiencing a nightmare. Then the horrifying reality set in. He was entombed alive. According to chronicler John of Nikiu, guards stationed outside heard his desperate cries for help, echoing from within the sealed sarcophagus. "I am still alive! Have mercy! Release me!" he screamed. The guards reported this to Empress Ariadne. Her response was chilling. "We have no red slippers for him anymore. The Imperial footwear would not be provided. The Emperor would not be released. Zeno's cries continued for days, growing weaker as the oxygen depleted and hunger set in. In the complete darkness, driven by starvation and desperation, the unthinkable happened. When the tomb was opened years later during renovations to the Imperial Mausoleum, workers made a grisly discovery. The Emperor's body showed signs that in his final days of madness and starvation, he had gnawed at the flesh of his own arms. His corpse was found in a contorted position, evidence of his desperate struggle in the confined space. His imperial purple shroud was torn to shreds, and his arms bore the unmistakable marks of human teeth.